Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic Hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to talk to you about the series premiere of The Walking Dead, The Ones Who Live, and it was called Years. And as it starts, it's 5 years after the explosion on the bridge, which seemingly killed Rick. And we find him living in the Civic Republic as something called a consignee, which I would call a conscripted person based on what they show. But anyway, he's a sort of prisoner, tethered to a soldier on this particular day, and he's on a volunteer mission under the military to take out walkers in a field which are on fire and walking towards a civilian agricultural area. While out of the sight of the soldier he was tethered to, Rick cuts off his own hand to sever his tie to the soldier so that he can escape, and then cauterizes the wound in a pile of burning ash that he finds in the area, but doesn't get away before he's caught, and then he seemingly passes out. He then has a dream of a life where he met Michonne on a park bench, seemingly before the outbreak. When he wakes up, he starts writing a letter to Michonne, explaining that he wound up, after the bridge explosion, in the Civic Republic, in a secret city of hundreds of thousands with a military of thousands, which doesn't let anyone leave so that the city stays a secret. At what seems to be his job later, Rick keeps killing walkers through a wall with like a pitchfork, one at a time, while narrating a letter in a bottle to Michonne. He writes these letters, but he can't really send them, so they go in bottles, and he puts them in the water. Before he's urged by a lieutenant colonel named Okafor to join the Civic Republic military. He's then urged by an acquaintance to do it as well, to get the other guy, Okafor, off his back and to use it as a way to eventually achieve his freedom. He decides to join up and is given a prosthetic hand with a blade, and over the course of a year learns various skills, as well as how to fly a helicopter. Okafor takes him and another lady named Thorne, who used to be in the South African Navy, to a trashed out location and tells them that because they are A's as opposed to B's, despite Jadis designating Rick as a B, when she captured him at the time when the bridge exploded and he didn't actually die. He tells them also they should be dead by Republic rules, but he's recruited them instead because he wants to covertly change the oppressive and very secretive Republic from the inside out, and he needs A's to do it. So basically alphas and betas. While off duty later, Rick talks with Major General Beale, who asks him if Okafor, who previously betrayed the US military to join the Pennsylvania National Guard to help them stop the military from using napalm against walkers without regard for surrounding human life at the time of the outbreak, only after complying at first to the point of killing his own dissenting wife, is up to anything as Beale looks into Rick's eyes and Rick says no, and then is asked if he joined for the mission or as a means to escape, and he tells Beale to look into his eyes. Sometime later, seemingly years later from when he first joined up, Rick hatches a plan to escape by faking his death during a mission, but it goes awry when he has to save a civilian. Thorne tells Rick that Okafor knows about his past life, and that he found out about it from reading Rick's bottle messages that he must have come across. So Rick confronts Okafor, who tells him he knows about Michonne and Judith, and that if Rick escapes, he'll be sent to kill him and anyone around him to keep the military's secrets. Rick then tells him to just kill him now, but Okafor declines. Rick and Thorne learn that Omaha, one of the three cities that I guess are part of the Republic, though not all the cities know that the other cities exist, has fallen seemingly to the Republic for some reason, though it's being disguised apparently as a walker attack. And this convinces Thorne even more that she needs to double down and commit to the Republic to survive. In a replay of the episode opening, after trying to kill himself but stopping, Rick writes one last letter to Michonne, saying he's determined to die if he can't escape after trying his best to get back to her. On a helicopter mission, Rick tells Okafor about when his dad saved him as a kid during a fire on their farm, and how years later he learned that his father had set the fire to keep the farm from failing and collect a check to start over with, and that he's all in with Okafor to burn things down to save everyone. Just before a projectile comes through the helicopter window, hitting Okafor before exploding and taking the helicopter down as it keeps taking fire, and of course, totally atomizing Okafor. The survivors of the crash suit up to engage their attackers on the ground, and it turns out that their attackers were Michonne and others. So Michonne and Rick find each other, and we see Michonne all in like samurai garb, and that's where the episode ended. So, I've said this a bunch of times because of my other reviews of these spin-offs, but I found The Walking Dead to be lackluster in the last few seasons. But I have found that these spin-offs are really good because the approach is different, the focus is different, and you're getting better character stuff, you're getting different settings that we didn't have before. And I don't know, I just think they're doing these spin-offs better than they did the last few seasons of The Walking Dead. And I would say that that includes this spin-off so far. I did like this episode and I like the overall setup because it paints a broader picture of the world that we didn't get to see in The Walking Dead, even though timeline-wise, these things were going on at the time. So I'm glad we're seeing that as opposed to not seeing it, which I don't know. On the one hand, I'm glad to see it because, it's a change from what the world was, and we're seeing a different world with walkers in it than what we saw on The Walking Dead, the show itself. But at the same time, I'm going, so for 5 years, this military existed, and there were these three huge cities with air conditioning and, helicopters and a functioning military, but it never came up. It's just so weird because by the time they get to a world beyond, which is 10 years in the future, it seems like that stuff is just starting. And I don't know if that's a regional thing, but it just seems weird to me. So I like it on the one hand, but on the other hand, it makes you kind of scratch your head. One thing I didn't like about this episode, though, again, it was nice to see Rick and, Terry O'Quinn is great. And the lady playing Thorne is great. She was great in Lucifer and on Spartacus. So that was all great, but they had to do lots of exposition in this one episode because of the way they've chosen to tell this Rick and Michonne story. And it had to cover years at a time. So I thought that was a bit much. With the DARYL show, the intervening period between when we last saw him on Walking Dead and the beginning of his adventures in Paris is shorter, admittedly shorter. So there was less exposition that had to be done. But even there, they didn't make the first episode a huge exposition dump. Where he was in between came out piecemeal over the 6 or 8 episodes or whatever it was. So I don't know why they didn't structure this series that way, where we would see what happened to Rick in those 5 years over the course of 6 or 8 episodes, whatever it's going to be, because it just made it like painfully obvious exposition dumping, which is never great. So I didn't love that. And I also found it confusing because they had so much exposition to do that some of it was just rushed and they didn't get to explain, like, what do you mean the three cities don't know each about the other? Like, one of them knows about two of them, including itself, but the other one doesn't. And why is that? And maybe we'll get to see that over the course of the series or the first season of the series. But now Rick is out of that area. So are we really going to get that? I don't know. It remains to be seen. But like, I found that confusing. And why are they conscripting people? They have thousands of people, and at some point they had 1,000 people. Aren't these people reproducing? Like, why are they? I don't understand. Why are they conscripting people? Why aren't they just being a city and let people find them? And why do they not want the people to leave and the secret of their existence to get out? But they have this huge military and they fly helicopters around. So, like, I don't know. That didn't make sense to me. So, I don't know. I'm hoping that'll make more sense as the episodes go on. I felt like I wanted to see Michonne in this episode, and we did, but kind of like in a fantasy setting. We didn't get to see what she was up to during the 5 years, and I know, of course, we're going to get that now, right? Because now the second episode is probably going to not pick up from where it left off, but it's going to show us what she was up to for 5 years. And again, it's going to be a lot of exposition dumping, I think, because they waited so long to do this series. And in that time, the characters were gone from the main show, which isn't the case with Negan and Maggie, although Maggie had left for a couple years. She came back before the main series ended. And it wasn't the case with DARYL. So they're kind of painted into this corner. And I'm thinking the second episode is going to focus only on Michonne and what she was doing during the 5 years. And then it'll pick up from where they meet each other. And I don't know about that. Why couldn't they have done the episode where it was a little bit of what Rick was up to and a little bit of what Michonne was up to, and then the next week the same thing, and then the next week the same thing, and then continue until they get to the meeting point? That would have been cool, I think. And then the second season, assuming there's going to be one, they could continue their adventure together if that's what they're going to do. But this is just going to be another exposition dump for the second episode. I think there's only 6 or 8. So then from there, what's the show going to be? They're on the run. I thought the show was supposed to be about them finding each other. So I'm a little confused, and it remains to be seen what the show's going to be about. But I like it. I'm intrigued. I want to see more. It didn't blow me away, but I enjoyed it. I do want to talk briefly, though, before I end the video, about the theme of fire in the show so far. If you look at the marketing material, the poster, for example, for the series shows Rick and Michonne against like a flame orange backdrop. And the logo itself for the show is on fire. And a mission that Rick goes on involves fire and walkers that are on fire. And he even has to, put his arm in fire to cauterize the wound of where he cut his hand off. And then he tells the story to Okafor about the fire when he was a kid. And they even show him like when he's delirious after cutting off his hands from blood loss, sort of like, I think that's when it was, flashing back, or maybe when the helicopter went down. But at some point, he has like a flashback to his farm and kind of like the events surrounding the fire. So fire is so far very important to the show. And I have a feeling that's not a coincidence, because he even says to Okafor, I want to, he uses the metaphor of fire. Let's basically, I don't think he necessarily used the words, but he basically says, let's do it. Let's quote unquote, or not quote unquote, but in other words, burn it down and renew from it. And fire is often seen that way, as a renewal. And, certainly in the case of like the Phoenix. So it'll be interesting to see if that's deliberate, if they're going somewhere with it, or if it's just, coincidence and it looks cool in the marketing. But I don't think that's the case. I think there's a point behind it. I think fire is going to have a lot to do with it thematically, at the very least, over the course of the rest of the season. But we'll have to see once the episodes are each released. But I'm going to get out of here for now. I'll be back to do a recap and review of the next episode a week from now. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.